I'm Charlie Kegg, and I have a pipe organ building firm in Northeast Ohio, about 50 miles south of Cleveland, in the Akron-Canton area. And I discovered automatic musical instruments before I discovered the pipe organ. And I discovered it at a very young age when my parents took me and my family to the Henry Ford Museum in Deerfield. And I saw this device. I was only that tall. I saw this device as my parents were buying tickets over here in the corner of the lobby, and I walked over and I was mesmerized by this machine. And I looked up at it, and as a 6-year-old, or however old I was, I understood what I was seeing, but I was trying to figure out how it worked. How can a violin play by itself? And as I stared at this machine, it stopped playing, and I'm sure I was being watched, because as the machine stopped playing, an attendant came over and opened the bottom of the machine to change the roll, and my eyes bugged out like Roger Rabbit, and I've been hooked ever since. And then they left it open for me to watch while it worked, and they started it up again. It was wonderful. Then at age 11, I discovered the pipe organ. And at age 18, I discovered my first pipe organ role-playing system. And so the scene was set early on for me. I was doomed from the beginning, so here we all are. I'm going to be talking about pipe organ role-player systems, one in particular. And while I know that this is not directly related to what a lot of you folks are interested in, it is related, and it's kind of the culmination of, technologically speaking, of the automatic musical instrument world because of its complexity and what it has to do. When you're playing a pipe organ, you've got to be able to play at least 2 and sometimes as many as 4 61-note keyboards, a 32-note pedal board, all the stops, all the expression, and there's a lot to keep track of. And how you go about that is was the challenge of all these different companies. And everyone was competing with each other, and they all came up with completely incompatible individual systems. And mine's better than yours. And my marketing to Mrs. Vanderfeller, who knew nothing about organs or anything else but was footing the bill for all this stuff, and they had to appeal to non-organ and non-musical people at times about what makes their system best. And well, their system only plays 58 of the 61 notes, mine plays 61. Well, now Mr. 58 note has to figure out a way to play all 61 notes to be able to compete with that. And it went back and forth a great deal. And it peaked in the late 20s with the last, more or less, the last generation of these machines. And one temptation of all of these individual circuits you had to keep track of is to make a wide roll. And there's at least one company that made an excessively wide roll, about a production roll you put on a machine that was about this wide. And that was the Austin company with their quadruplex player. And they had full 61 notes times 3, 32 notes, and expression, and then stops were controlled by multiplexing those notes just for a moment. They would take the top and the bottom notes out of a keyboard just for a moment, set the stops, and go back to notes. So even they couldn't have notes playing absolutely constantly all the time. Unfortunately, they only made about 10 players. So while that perforator still exists, the market for those rolls is almost non-existent. I have a few of those. I wish I'd brought one of those rolls because they're awkward to handle because they're so big. They didn't even put them in boxes, they put them in drawers. So they're hard to manage. But most companies did some form of reduction of the number of holes they needed. I hesitate to use the word multiplex. They kind of did that, but not exactly. The Moller player was introduced late in the game, the Artiste player. Moller had several role players from the beginning that they would offer occasionally when somebody wanted one, but most people didn't ask that company for players. They were not in that market, even though they were the largest organ company in the world at the time. And in 1926, the Moller company built 360 some organs, a pipe organ per day. coming out of the factory. Think about that. Smokestacks belching black smoke, steam engines, line shafts, belts, organ, out the end. Wood in the one end, organ out the other. But they had an advantage over some of the other companies when they came late to the game, in that they were able to design this Moller player, this Artiste player, from scratch. And they could look at what everybody else was doing and immediately leapfrog them in technology. It didn't evolve over time. Aeolian was the first to the game in many respects. Welty actually was, but in this country, Aeolian was. And they started in the teens, offering pipe organ players that were based on their orchestrelle players, the solo orchestrelle in particular. And it evolved from there, and they kept adding features to it and making it automatic, and they were one of the people that had to, because it came from the 116-note orchestrelle player, which was 58 notes per manual, in order to get 61 notes and compete with everybody else over here, they added this little funny device that pretended they had the top 3 notes, and it played when you did this over here, when you needed those notes. It was awkward, but they could say they had 61-note range. I have changed this talk a little bit since I've been here. This is my first AMICA convention. I should have been here many years ago, but I just haven't. I've watched you guys from afar. But since I've been here, I've changed my talk a little bit because I realize that there are many people that don't know exactly what a master roll is. We talk about that, but what is it for real? All of these pipe organ, or any player system has to punch production rolls from something. It has to start somewhere. And the master roll is what actually drives the perforator. And it can drive multiple perforators at once. It depends on how the system is arranged. And there are 2 ways that this master roll is used. One is mechanical, where there are pins that will read through the paper in some form, and the other way is pneumatic, where it reads the master roll like a final machine would read a production roll, but in some modified way to make it more accurate. Part of the problem of making a production roll, and the big problem in making reproduction rolls from an existing production roll, is the errors that can creep in when you use a production roll for a data source to make the new roll. And to come to a quick understanding of what this error is, if you're reading a roll that is a standard production roll that you would play on your piano, as soon as that slot or that hole begins to uncover the tracker bar port, the perforator will start punching. And it won't stop punching until that port is completely closed. And so it can add a punch or 2 at each end of everything. And that can stretch things out, and in some cases make them pretty awful musically. Anybody here know who Jonathan Edwards is? Jonathan and Darlene Edwards? Okay, you'll understand this. Many years ago, I knew a fellow that was reproducing pipe organ rolls that were on a standard 9/2" scale, so he could do them on a piano perforator. He didn't do anything about this, and it was a particular system that the music is compressed. They run at about 30 to 40 on a tempo lever, so they run pretty slow, so the music's very compressed. So this error is very exaggerated. And so it was for a pipe organ player that would play in a home, so they made sure that everything was very legato. So slots that were like this on the original roll were like this on his reproduction rolls. And everything was smeared together. It sounded like somebody was drunk playing or fell into the keyboard. And for those of you who know who Jonathan Edwards is, it sounded a lot like Jonathan Edwards was playing. And so herein lies the problem with master rolls in reading them. So I don't want to say anything in absolutes, because in this world you can't say things definitively forever, but most master rolls are at a very large scale. It's kind of like photography. If you start with something big, you can shrink it down and keep lots and lots of definition. But if you start with something small and it ends up shrinking down, you have a problem. Most master rolls are pretty big, and they allow you to have the resolution you need for the final production. The picture you see on the screen is a perforator that I found. It's actually sitting in a department store on display. This machine reads its master rolls pneumatically. And all of these machines have a master roll that goes through in some portion of the machine here. Oh, look, it works. And then the production roll starts the paper here and goes through and comes out the other end over here. And then you've got this gizmo in here, which is here the tubes going to a tracker bar reading this master roll. I have no idea what this is. I just found it on the internet. But then it's running the punches, which will go through a series of rods that are triggering the punch head right here. So it has to read the master roll, and some of them I've seen go through in a smooth progression. Others go through by steps, and the step-by-step perforator I think is the more common. So I'm going to show you real quickly an example of a Moller master roll. If you could help me here. I think we're going to do something different because of our photographer. So these rolls are very fragile. They're very dry, and if you go beyond flat, they shatter. So, and as you can see, this one shattered. I want you to grab that end. Grab this end, and we're going to unroll it. And this will be up here for you to look at more closely. This roll has 133 channels. And we'll see this more in the photographs on the screen later. But if you notice, in this system, there is a hole in the master roll for every single hole in the paper. So you're looking at a chain perforation there. And there's 2 steps between each hole that make up a chain. You'll see that some of them are marked in orange grease pencil and some are marked in black. The Moller Artiste system uses a staggered tracker bar, so there's a keyboard on each row, but they're side by side on the perforator. So the orange is one tracker bar and the black is the other tracker bar. It's how the arranger kept things separate. The big slot you see to your left at the top, that is a stop change hole, and it's got a number on it because that was the number of the stop change on this particular piece. Moller did a fun thing cosmetically that I have been driven to make sure that doesn't get sacrificed in this whole system, is that you'll see the orange lines begin with a chain. The black lines begin with a slot. And that is simply a visual thing, so when you're watching the roll, you can keep track of which keyboard is which. It has nothing to do with the music. Aeolian did this on their DuoArt system, and Moller did it. It's just a choice that was made by the people that made the roll, and it's totally cosmetic. One of the things that has driven this project, which I'll talk about in the history, is how to preserve this information. And it is so precise on this system that I wanted to make sure that the data capture is equally precise so that we don't lose things like that. Also, I want you to look at the very top of the roll. You'll see markings in pencil. I will talk about that later on in the chat about how they did these things. But those are measure and beat marks that were laid out to make the master roll. How do you make these things? How do you go from music to this? Is there a different process for each company? And I can tell you about how a number of companies did it, and certainly this one.
So, could you show the orange and the black again?
Yes, the orange here and the black here. There's a black grease pencil mark. And the arrangers laid these rolls out according to the beats. They laid the beats out through a special system that they had, and then straight lined it across for where the notes would start and stop. And then they put the grease pencil marks on there, remembering that these are staggered rows. So if you start a note on both trackers at the same time, they had to be staggered here as well. And they are 9 steps apart to make them both strike simultaneously. Let's see here, what else? This will be up here. You'll be welcome to come up and have a look at it after we're done. Then after the marks were made, they sent it out to the floor, and some low-paid lackey got to punch all of these by hand. And I have all the punches, well, I have many of the punches that were done with this. There's single punches and 3 multiples, and there's even a 5 multiple, all spaced out for doing this. But think about that, the amount of time that would take. So, and then it would go to the perforator from here. And sadly, this is a piece of a roll. This is not an entire roll. I did get a good scan out of it before it died, but on the re-roll on the perforator, it died. These rolls can be this big and weigh 40, 50 pounds. I have 800 of them. Okay. This is a picture of my shop, of a room in my shop where all of this is stored. And it was rededicated to the Kegg Organ Company Moller perforator department.
QRS, in other words.
Well, yeah. This particular system has an interesting history because, again, Moller was not one of the major players in the residential or player pipe organ market, even though they were the largest pipe organ company extant at the time. But occasionally they would be asked to build a roll player, and they built several, and they seemed to have purchased rolls from Connorized Music in New York, which operated as a job shop, and made their custom rolls for them. There is conflicting evidence about whether they were automatically controlled or not. But I have one roll from the previous system in my collection, which was called the Solo Symphonist, and it does in fact have automatic control. Limited, but automatic control. So at least at some point in their evolution, they went from semi-automatic notes only to some form of automatic control. But it was all done on a very limited basis. I know of none of the master rolls, assuming that they came from Connorized, assuming they used the same system, where they would make the master rolls by some method, and they would, which were provided by Connorized. You'd ship them off to New York City, and they would perforate them and send the master roll back to you along with the production rolls, and that's how they did business. But this is a previous example, and I have actually in my past owned one of these machines. It was actually the guts out of a console, but it was the darndest thing for what they went through to make this work in a very limited way. It was really Rube Goldberg. I'll be happy to tell you about it if somebody really wants to know. But they made several different versions. But then along came a fellow by the name of Larkin, and Mr. Larkin owned a mail-order soap company, which was a big deal in the late 1800s and very early 1900s. And they peaked in the 20s, in the early 20s. And they built a building in Buffalo, New York, an office building next to their factory. And Mr. Larkin liked music. And Mr. Larkin decided to install a 90-rank organ in the atrium of the building, which was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. Sadly, this building is gone. But the deal was he had the Moller had to provide a 90-rank organ with 100 fully automatic player rolls. So they were required to do this, and their thought was, we'll do another one of these one-offs to get this done, move on. So they hired a fellow named Frederick Hotchkiss and Leonard Palubit, and I hope I'm saying his name right, Mr. Hotchkiss was a very interesting man. He was an engineer, a composer, a conductor, and an organist. All of those things wrapped up in one. And Mr. Palubit was very active in the player world, inventing things. So the two of them put their heads together, and they took the Moller Solo Symphonist layout and basic concept and added a much more sophisticated stop and expression control to it. Again, using Connorized Music and their master roll system just the way they had, and expanded it out as far as they could. These rolls are 12 to the inch, and in the staggered configuration, 133 channels. So they go within about 3/32 of the margin of the roll. These are 11 1/4 inch standard width rolls. Over the course of this, by the way, there was a really good article that Jim Weisenborn did years ago in the AMICA bulletin about this system, and it's almost correct. Everything in there, but it's really well written and tells you the whole history of this. It's a fascinating story, which I won't go into, but the bottom line is they decided, you know, we're spending all this time and money on this. Let's throw this out to Moller that they really should offer this to the world as a better system than anybody else's, which it arguably was in some regards. And they were successful in that, and Moller decided to introduce this to the world, and in 1927 they announced its introduction to the market. What timing, huh? They made, but even introducing in 1927, they ended up building about 250 players. The market, as you know, kind of crashed and burned, both for the residential market and for players in general. Nobody knew it was happening yet, but that's what was happening. And eventually, Moller transitioned to a new market that came out in the early 30s, where one of the few industries that had money was the mortuary business. And it became fashionable to build very fancy mortuaries to do funerals, elaborate Tudor revival and colonial buildings that had the very best for your loved one. And they started to buy pipe organs with players. And Moller switched big time into that, and sadly, most of the players they built went into mortuaries. So the music that was chosen for them was not always inspirational. However, they built a couple of very late players. They built a player residence theater organ for a private home in South Africa right after World War II, about 1949. It had been contracted, or was under, they were negotiating for it before the war, and it got postponed, and they still wanted it, so they built this organ. It eventually made its way to the Laukoff organ supply firm in Germany, because Mr. Laukoff thought, this is fun, let's get this and bring it here. So when it became available, it got shipped to Germany, and I've actually been inside and gone through that organ. And of course, some of you may know that the Laukoff firm, after 135 years, went belly up during COVID. And so I don't know what the disposition of that organ is, but they built that around 49. But the most remarkable organ is the one you see on the screen. It's the George Washington Memorial Masonic Temple in Arlington, Virginia. Was installed in 1954 with a shiny brand new roll player and about 200 rolls, a huge roll collection. And if you look closely, you'll see that there's the organ console. It frequently lives down here, but in this picture it's up here. And as I remember, the player is off stage left, just off stage left, in a little nook with all the rolls in a cabinet right next to it. And it's an amazing sound. The organ chamber is up here at the top, and it also has a set of back shades on the back side of the chamber that opens into basically the lobby of the building, so it can play either way. And there are speaker controls on the console and the player that you can adjust which set of shades is active. They did a lot of fun stuff. Okay, one of the oddball things about the Moller system is that you saw in the master roll that there was a stop slot, a single stop slot that was put into the roll for a stop change. That's all you got on a production roll off the perforator, because they customized every roll for every client when you bought a roll. They would change the stops to match your system. None of this generic things that those people do. We make your roll just for you. Yeah. So when you ordered a roll from Moller, they would pull the roll off the shelf and pull your file to see what your organ was, and pull the file that was the ideal studio spec for what we want to have on the roll, and then figure out how to do that. In some cases you had to reduce it, very occasionally you had to increase it, but usually it was reduction. And it was a very intensive process. This made Moller rolls very expensive, but they were very custom and just for you. One of the good news is Moller used really, really good paper. Their paper wears like iron. However, it is still starting to fail these days. What you see on the screen is the registration machine, and this is one of the machines that was used to punch the registration, these custom registrations into each roll for every stop change. And a large roll could have 50 or 60 stop changes in it. The one that I have here to show you, which is the machine that's in the picture, is what I believe to be the portable machine. There's correspondence that refers to the portable machine they would take out on the road and do modifications on site, which implies there was a non-portable machine, but I know nothing of this machine. So I inherited 3 spool frames and 1 punch head, which I put this together from some years ago. But what you would do is every stop change is numbered. And there's our stop slot.
Kicker slot.
The kicker slot. Or its official name is combination slot, but what we all call it is the kicker slot. Notice that this slot has rounded top and bottom. It was punched in by the perforator. These rectangular slots are all punched in by the registration machine by hand. And each, let's see if I can get in here and look at this. Every roll is every stop change is numbered. And if you look right there, why do I have a hand? Every stop change is numbered. And the procedure, I learned this. I had to learn how to do all of this by looking at the few photographs and all of the Moller rolls that I've had over the years and realize how this was done. You have to go through and number every single stop slot to make sure you don't register something in the wrong place. So when you get to the end, you know how many stop changes there are, and that number better match or you've made a mistake. And then you go backwards from that and start punching them in. Ahead of every stop change, there's also a witness mark that is down here on the side, and you line it up. There's a little tiny slot. Let's see here. There we go. There's a little tiny witness line on this brass piece that you line a witness mark up, and I had to make this piece up here that spaced the stop change slot, because when it's under the punch you can't see it, so you got to make sure everything's lined up right. So you put this witness mark in and you bring it down here to where it lines up, and then you run the punches. There are 61 stop functions that happen during a stop change. When that stop slot comes by, a whole lot of stuff happens real fast. The lower row of holes has all of its notes muted. Those holes are connected to stop relays. Those relays lock themselves in through a cancel switch. It trips the cancel switch very briefly using the kicker relay, which Keith mentioned, which looks like a little harpsichord pluck, and it plucks the contact. Just open that switch briefly. It drops all the old switches, all the old relays out, and allows the new ones to lock in, and then puts everything back to notes. And that happens in about 1/8 of a second. The upper tracker bar is allowed to play notes through all of this. So if it does not change, you can play notes through a stop change. And the stop change, even though all the stops are turned off and back on, it happens fast enough that the music can be uninterrupted during that event. This is the tool that you use to punch the individual punches of the registration machine. That's these guys right here. Those are all individual rectangular punches. So once you line everything up and you get the paper centered, because the paper wanders a little bit, so you got to make sure the paper's centered, and then you go down and you select your stops. Every roll has a file, and there's the roll number right there, and in that file is a set of sheets of paper, and each sheet is one stop change. And this gives you all the information that you will want for that, ideally for the stops for that stop change. And then if you don't have these things, you have to make value judgments to make the music acceptable for the organ that's there. And the way I do this is I look ahead because I can see what's coming up on the paper, and I say, oh, the melody's there, the accompaniment here, something else is over here, I see where they want to do this. I don't have these things. What do I have to do to make it sound pretty? And that's the kind of thing you have to go through when you're registering Moller rolls. When I first found the player, this player was at Moller until probably around 1990. With all the master rolls, all the files, everything was still there. Jim Weisenborn is a name that some of you may know. He's passed on now, but he was an organ aficionado and a librarian. And he went and got himself into the Moller company and photocopied basically everything he could find. So he had photocopies of stuff, but he got a relationship going with there, and eventually Moller sold him all of this stuff. The perforator, the master rolls, all the documentation, anything that new old stock, spool ends, roll tabs, anything that had something to do with the player, he got. He didn't know what to do with it, so he took it back to Detroit and eventually donated it to a museum. And it got put on display where they spray painted the perforator machine gray, grease and all, everything got sprayed gray and got set over in a corner. And the rolls got put somewhere. And they did nothing with it. Some years went by, and the American Organ Academy, which was John Schwant's organization that was at the University of Oklahoma at Norman, he found out about them and said, hey, this would be a good place for this. So he undonated it to the museum, and they were happy to get rid of it, frankly. And it all went to Norman. And I've been following this since I was 18, and I knew about this player. I knew that all this stuff existed. I found out very early on. And I've watched all this go around the country. And I knew Jim. He and I found each other and talked about Moller stuff from many years ago. So when I saw this land there, I started talking to these guys, and I say, I can help you with that if you'll let me. And they did. And I spent 6 or 8 years going down and spending a week with them, a week at a time. And this is how I first found the perforator. You'll notice it's up on a shelf. It's way up high in the air in a very narrow shelf where it was put there by a forklift. And you'll see all this stuff is sort of tucked in underneath it. This is the paper pulling device that goes actually on the other end, and it's all pulled in. Take special note of one of these 2 drive shafts. You'll notice it's not parallel to the rest of the machine. The primary drive shaft extended out the side of the machine about this big, where it had a wheel that ran from an overhead line shaft from the steam engine, belching black smoke at the other end of the building. It was too wide to go through a door in the museum, so they dropped out the bearing keepers, the bottom part of the bearing, to take that shaft off so they could get it through the door, and promptly lost the caps of the bearing, which are big parts. So and they also took off the primary punch head, moves up and down on tie rods that are probably Model T piston tie rods, but it kind of looked like that. They lost the bottom part of that one, those 2. So there's 2 major pieces of this machine. As an organ builder, that would be very intimidating to me. But we found a fabulous machine shop in the Oklahoma City area. And it took a while for them to understand what this was. But they kept saying, well, what's the model number? What's the serial number? 1. This perforator came from Connerized Music in New York. It was one of their production perforators, one of many, I'm sure. Clearly a custom machine, and they were in some respects a job shop. They would do custom stuff for you. And we'll show you this a little bit later on. But here is the machine as it sits in my shop right now. This machine is adjustable. You could adjust the interposers, which carry the information from the master roll, and it fans from the wide master roll into the narrow production roll and keys the punches. But these are pivoted at the back, and you can fan them out to different spacing. And then at the end of the punch head, you could put a different punch head on that had different size punches at different spacing. So they could do custom stuff on this perforator. It was changeable. I only have one punch head for it, but you can see how it's made. So they made the rolls for Moller, and then somewhere around 1929, Moller acquired the perforator from Connerized and brought it in-house. So that's how they ended up with it. So here is the perforator as it sits in my shop right now. The master rolls go on a feed arm. It's not really a spool, but an arm that's pivoted. And it goes through a hold-down bar, past a cogged set of wheels that actually drive the roll forward, and then is taken up here. After the roll is done, it gets pulled over to this device and rewound onto this spool. And then you pick the whole thing up in one piece, spool and all, it's spring-loaded. Take it down, put it up on end, and undo it enough that you can pull the center core back out. And you have to, this is up in the air, this is about 4.5 feet off the floor, which we realized in the pictures, it's in the Moller factory it was about 4.5 feet off the floor, and there's a reason for that, to make all this work. The paper path originally was over here. There was a large rack of 8 copies of paper that came through. Now I've got 3 down here that come up and go through the system. This is through the punch head that's right here, and the paper path is here. This is the device that pulls it. And all of this works, this machine works on steps. Everything is step by step. So the master roll is read by pins that come up and feel for holes. And they feel the master roll is stationary when this happens. It steps in, pins come up, it triggers the interposer, which triggers the punch is done, and then the pins are retracted, the punches are retracted, then the master roll goes one step, and the production roll goes one tiny little step in proportion. So it all works step by step. And if you look at the master roll again, you'll see there's tiny dots on there. That is the punch matrix. Some of you may have heard about the punch matrix. And when you're reproducing rolls from a production roll, you have to re-engineer what the punch matrix is, how many steps that roll went through. And it's always a challenge to do that. I have it here. I don't have to figure it out. And here's how the system works. The master roll is coming through here. These are the feeler pins that are brought up and feel if there's a hole. They engage with this notch down here in the interposer, which works laterally from left to right. Each one of these pins is spring-loaded, and then there is a bar, a reset bar, that travels front to back in your picture. You're seeing the end of it in this photograph. And that bar can come down and grab this little keeper that's on each pin and pull all the pins down together, or let them go and go into their respective holes. If the pins are not allowed to pass through the paper because there is no hole, they engage in this little notch, which keeps the interposer from moving forward. If the pin goes through the hole, it comes above the notch, as you see in the picture, and the interposer can move forward, and does. Over at this end, this is where the fan takes place, where it goes from the wide roll to the narrow roll. At this end, there's a punch head that's a large assembly here, and the whole business is going up and down, paper and all, with the punches. And most of the time, the punches right up and down don't do anything. But if an interposer comes out, it stops that punch from moving, and the punch head moves around it, and the hole is punched. At the end of all of that, the reset bars pull all the interposers back, pull the pins down, move everything forward, and we start all over again. Goes through the pulling device here. So there's the basic diagram of how we're working.
How do you compensate for the diameter of the rolls changing as the roll progresses?
They do not. Because it is step by step, it's always exactly the same. so that they don't have to, because it's not read pneumatically. That's another good point. There are advantages and disadvantages to pneumatic reading of a master roll versus mechanical reading of a master roll. This is one of the advantages of mechanical. It's always the same, you don't have to compensate, and it doesn't change from day to day. I have seen Aeolian organ rolls, 2 copies of the same roll that were as much as 3 inches different in overall length. That was from run to run. It would vary that much. But in this system that's mechanically read, in theory, if everything works right, they're all exactly the same. The only other perforator I know about that works on this system is at the Herschel Museum at the Wurlitzer band organ roll perforator. And there's YouTube videos of that. You can see this happening. Same theory, operating at a different scale, but the same theory. So what you're seeing here, these are the feeler pins, and there's the master roll above it, and they are feeling through the paper. And each one of these little brass bars is that bar that guides the pin and is also what grabs the reset bar. And here are the individual springs. And each one doesn't have a lot of tension. It's like a ballpoint pen kind of a spring tension. It's not very much. Collectively it's a lot, but it's not very much individually. And down here are the interposers. This is the horizontal piece, and you can see that these are fanned out. You will see what these little bars are. These little rods have been added to the machine. We'll talk about that a little bit later. One of the problems that I've had is these are made out of brass, and they have very large set screws in them, and you can actually see the thread of the set screw coming through the surface of the brass. They come so close. So and they're brittle and they break. So I've had a few stainless steel ones made with a standard set screw. Eventually I will replace all of these, because in production, as you will see, if the machine is running really at its production speed, they get hit pretty hard, which is why I don't run it that fast yet. This is looking down the middle of the machine. The master roll's above us. The feeler pins are on the right. This is the area where it actually feels through the paper. And here are the interposers. Each one has a spring to pull it to the left, and the reset bar pulls it back to the right. This is the other end of the machine. This is the punch head. And here you see the interposers in their narrow configuration at the other end, and there are guides right here to guide them. And this is how you could change the guide in the punch head and spread these out and do different scale rolls on this same machine. And here's a close-up, and you'll see all the interposers getting ready to pop out, and this whole business that you see that's not painted, all of that goes up and down. And these are the punches, and they've got a little shoulder on them here, and this bar is to pick the punch up out of the paper, up on the upscale. And so and the paper is down here, and this whole business is going up and down, paper and all. Punches normally don't do anything, but if an interposer pops out, it will stop the punch, and it will make a hole. And here, this is a video that's on our YouTube channel. We're going to watch it here, and you can see the machine in motion. This is when it was in Oklahoma. And it's running as it always was, step by step. It's got a VFD drive on the motor so that I can adjust it down to almost 0 speed. We have musical background. Can make 8 copies at once. There are the feeler pins going up when it sees a hole. The videographer is going up and down a ladder, so forgive that. The paper is trimmed just to final width just before it goes into the punch head. There's the master roll going by. That's actually not correct. It's not 8:1. It's a different ratio. I was guessing there. There you see the keeper bar that keeps the paper down, and you'll see the pins coming up whenever it sees a hole. And then there's the drive cogs on the edge. More about that later on. And the problems with this machine.
What speed would you consider that as we see it? Very fast, or
This is running at about 1.5 to 2 punches per second. Allegedly, it ran at 8 punches per second in production. Again, running from a steam engine, you did not have speed control. It was on or off. This is early on in cell phones, so it struggles with focus occasionally. But the interposer's popping out to stop the punches coming up, so watch for that. It's really a very simple concept.
Charles, when I see this machine at work, and I think of us today, and we think we are so smart with our technology, but yet you look at this technology that, and I look at my reed organs, which are over 100 years old, and just the incredible engineering that went into it.
We like to think that we're advanced, but I always tell people the Empire State Building was built in 1930 and 31 in about, what was it, 14 months? They built that entire building.
I think the technology is probably 1870s.
Perhaps.
Because Aeolian were making rolls in 1878.
Yes, this goes way back.
Yes.
So here you see the pulling device. Now this is one of the few parts of the perforator that I actually had to restore completely because it was a mess. And all the rubber pads were hard as a rock, and it had been painted and nothing worked. Yes, sir?
Did you say 8 copies at once?
It can make as many as 8 copies.
And were they of equal quality?
Actually, yes, you can, even the top and bottom copy actually is quite usable. In the correspondence, they talk about making a proof roll, a single proof roll. And I have attempted to make a single copy, and it struggles with, I think if my punches were really sharp, I would have no trouble. But I found that I have to make 1 or 2 copies, I have to have a backing paper to make it work well. Here you see the pulling device, and it's pulling the production roll at the tiny step that it moves. And Phil Bordelot asked me what that was, and that's a number I should have in my head, but I don't. And I'm going to find out and email that to you. So there's 8 copies of that particular roll, which actually might be the roll that I have up here. It might have come from this run. And you can see what's going on in there, if it ever focuses. At the end of every roll, they put the roll number into the master roll, so it kind of digitally bunches it out, which is very much fun. That's a 6-rank Moller organ in Santa Fe playing from a roll. So that's the beginning of every roll, has a look like that. Bass and treble with the arrow going, and I think that was pretty much for the arrangers to keep their head screwed on straight when you're doing this. So the master rolls are about 27 inches wide. They have 133 channels, and in fact this master roll has 135 channels, but only on this perforator, the outside 2 channels do not have any hardware to support them, just the holes in the keeper. But they are on the master roll. So the very last, you know what? I just lied to you. That's not correct. The last row is in use. So the perforator has 135, but the master roll only has 133. How about that?
The punch face of each punch, was it straight across, or did it have a slight hollow in the middle?
That's a good question. I believe it to be straight across. I had some new punches made because there were several that were broken, and there were a few new old stock spares, but not enough. So I had a few punches made at a machine shop, and they ground them flat. That's a really interesting question. I need to go back and look at that. I never thought of that. Thank you for that.
It affected how the punches come out clean. Most production perfect, and I think of that. Because if you hold them, you cut the edges, and then the chad would rotate, jamming on one end. I think that's the reason for the underlying design that way.
It could very well be.
Some even used pointed punches, So it actually pinned the chant in the middle and prevented it jamming.
I'm pretty sure they are not that form.
Exactly.
They might have a slight angle to them, but I believe them to be flat, but I may be wrong. I need to go back and look at that.
Those type were called bursting punches. I think that those are used for stamp production when they used to cut all
Interesting.
the,
I knew I'd learned something, and I've learned already many things. This is great. We talked about this already, but here's a close-up of the roll and how you see things happen. Here is a pair of notes that are starting on both trackers simultaneously. The same note on each tracker, but you'll see it's offset from the slotted start to the non-slotted start on that particular roll. These are expression tracks over here. There are 8 expression tracks, 2 boxes of 4, and they're very simple. It's just a chain. It goes 0 through 4. 4 stages. And as somebody once said, how do you like shades? And the answer to that, the correct answer is in motion.
Yeah.
So,
yes.
and if you look closely here, you'll see there is 3/4. And there is a measure mark. I don't remember what it says, but that's 3/4, and this would be the beat. The way these were established is they had a device. This was unique to Mr. Hotchkiss and the way he did things. Almost all Moller rolls are drawing board rolls. They were not hand played. They had a series. He did not believe in hand playing. He thought he could do it better than anybody playing by hand.
Yes.
But the market, the salespeople insisted that he do this. So they ended up building a recording organ and actually made hand played rolls. But he had a device he called a nuancer, and it had a narrow paper tape, kind of like a ticker tape machine, that was traveling at a fixed speed. Moller rolls have a fixed normal speed that is considered recommended. And he had 3 telegraph keys that would drop markings on this paper tape. I know one of them was measure and one was beat. I don't know what the third one was, but it was something. And he or an operator would sit at these telegraph keys, and they would hire somebody, sometimes famous people, to come in and conduct a piece, waving their arms in the air with no music. And they would conduct the piece and put the rallentondos and the accelerandos into the music. And as they put these markings on, the beats would get further apart or closer together as the speed changed. They would then paper clip this to the side of the master roll that they had in their studio, and we have pictures of this. And they would then put these markings on the edge and transfer all of this. And that's how they made their rolls to not sound mechanical. And by and large, they were quite successful. Their big orchestral pieces are some of the best things they do, because this system can play 4 musical lines simultaneously, independently. And there weren't very many systems that could do that. So they could make a lot of music that other people couldn't. Frequently, for example, they would have a pedal line, a chordal accompaniment, a melody, and harp arpeggios going all at the same time. Or they would have an oboe and clarinet in dialogue with an accompaniment and a bass. Frequently, they would use 4-part music that way. You had to have a 3-manual organ to do it, or bigger, but that's how they would use this.
So there was not orchestral reductions, they were actual...
Well, they were reduced as little as possible. One of the rolls that Moller issued, and they were the only company that issued the Smetana Moldau, or Altava, which is one of my favorite orchestral pieces. And it always amazed me that nobody else ever issued that piece until I heard a human transcription of that piece. And if you know that piece, it has the river going through it, all the way through the piece without stop. And the human had to drop that out a few times to play the transcription. The artiste does not. Hotchkiss said, I can put more music in than a human can play, and I don't want to limit myself to mere mortals. And he didn't. So again, going back to our shop, the Moller library is about 502 or 4 titles, and some of them require more than 1 master roll. There are a few that require up to 6 master rolls that have to be pieced together to get 1 production roll. They can last as much. They do issue rolls that run on slow, which is another. There's stop, slow, normal, and fast. Those are the 4 markings on a Moller Artiste school box. And they tell you to put these on slow. These are for long playing rolls. So things like the 1812 Overture or number 475H Funeral Collection. 475 was popular. It was A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, and J, I believe. So,
The March Funèbre and Sharafi was split pedal.
yeah, they did a lot of fun things. So I have about 800 master rolls. And the reason I say about 502 to 4 titles is it's a little bit squishy what the entire inventory is still. Because there are some things on the published list that Jim Weisenborn put in his AMICA bulletin that, and even he says they're not issued. They were assigned a number, but we think maybe not issued. I have found one that said not issued, and the next number in line was never used, but I had a master roll of that not used number, and it was one of the first ones I scanned in my scanning process because I want to know what it was, and it turned out to be the one previous that had never been issued. And it's Under a Texas Moon, which is a great number. It's one of their popular pieces. So what my goal in this project is to gather this information and commit it to computer in a way that could be recreated absolutely exactly the way the master roll was. So I introduced this device here, which is a set of rods that watch the interposers and send individual MIDI impulses to the computer step by step. And there you see the rods coming back to circuit boards that I built with optical encoders on them.
So electronic solenoids?
Pardon me?
Electronic solenoids?
No, these are rods that move with the interposers and have a little flag on them, and they go through a U-shaped optical sensor that sends a clean signal out for the MIDI. It's a MIDI note signal that is in 3 channels. I had 133, so my system I'm using has 64 notes per channel, so I had to use 3 to get everything in. And here it is operating and scanning a roll. This is a redundant readout of what's going on. And here you see what's happening down there. At every step, when a pin goes up and a punch gets punched, one of those lights lights up. And it's sending information to the computer step by step, and there's an exact reproduction, hole by hole, of the master roll. And sometimes I can do this fast. More often than not, I do it really slowly because the rolls need baby going through. I'm running out of time, so but I'm almost at the end. But here you can see the pattern happening, and we'll go back to the computer here momentarily. There's tracking control because it never stays exactly where it belongs, and there's a handle over here that you're constantly watching to keep everything in line. It takes me 2 to 4 hours to scan one roll if everything goes well. And there's 800 of them. Pray for me. And actually, on this one, I threw some paper in the perforator so we could be perforating while we were going. This is a single sheet, and it came out more or less okay, but if you look at the top, you'll see there's a lot of mispunched holes. I've since gone to backing paper. So I had to build a device that would emulate the roll and stop those feeler pins from coming up. And the way it works is there's a vertical pin that's very strong that stops the pin, but it's easy to pull sideways with a little electromagnet. And so here's a drawing of that device, all lined up, 133 of them. And there's a rendering of that same device with the drive roll. There's the device. I'm sitting on my bench. That's sitting as you look down on it normally. And here I am assembling. Here are all the, it's upside down. Here's all the pins that will stop the feeler pins and all the guys to grab it and pull it sideways. And there it is sitting on the machine. I have Craig Williams on the West Coast has been helping me with software because the step recording is very easy to do. The step playback has been a vexing problem for me for years. But he's actually written, there you can see the machine sitting in place with the pins, the stop pins over the feeler pins. And here is Craig's software that he's done for me, and It's all ready to go, but I don't have it yet. I was hoping to have it for this, but I don't have it yet. But here it is running an example of it. The blue dot is a simulated pulse that the perforator would send for the next frame of information. And these are the drivers that will run those magnets. So the perforator will tell the system when it's ready for the next frame of information. And so I can run it at any speed in playback as well. But you'll see it going by here as it's going through the steps. There's the step of the perforator. And then here are our punches being triggered. So as I told Keith Bigger, I'm this close to being able to actually produce rolls. But I've been hesitant to scan rolls because I'll only going to go through the machine one more time. And I want to make sure I have all of this that I know is going to work before I start doing this for real. So that's the end of my little chit chat. And I will be, there's more to tell about this, and as anybody that knows me will tell you, I can talk for hours on this stuff, way longer than any of you want to listen to me. But we've got a 15-minute break. I'll be happy to answer questions. Unfortunately, I was planning to be here through Saturday. I have had a family emergency come up, and I need to leave after my next talk. So, one more thing. Player pipe organs, plural, playerpipeorgans.com. It's a brand new website. It's been up for about 4 days, where I have information about all these role player systems that I'm going to be adding to over the years. Feel free to have a look at it. It's an archival thing to give all this information about many of these different player systems. And hopefully there'll be a link there where you can buy new Moller rolls, if any of you are interested. Playerpipeorgans.com with an S after organs. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.